Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Lynn Blassie with Concussion Awareness Now. As we head into National Concussion Awareness Day on September 19th, we thank you for joining us today for this Concussion Awareness Now webinar. Is concussion a brain injury? Spoiler alert, I'm going to answer this question right up front. A concussion is a traumatic brain injury, and yet a recent poll from the Brain Injury Association of America shows that 81% of adults are unaware of this fact. This is why we're here today, to help everyone understand the seriousness of concussions, including what they are, signs and symptoms, how they're diagnosed, and how the clinical landscape is evolving, the potential impact of concussions on real people, and lastly, to show ways in which you can help spread awareness of this important topic on National Concussion Awareness Day and beyond. We'll take questions from you at the end. Please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions during the webinar. I'm very excited to welcome our three panelists today, Kelly Sarmiento, Sarah Goody, and Lindsay Simpson. They will share their experiences with concussions and how they work to increase awareness in different ways. Then we'll share some of the ways that you can help share concussion awareness with resources at the end of our conversation. Let's get started. I'm going to turn to Kelly Sarmiento first. Kelly is Director of Outreach Programs at the Brain Injury Association of America. Kelly has a research and education background, and prior to joining BIAA, she led the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Heads Up campaign, an educational initiative aimed at protecting children by raising awareness and informing action to improve prevention, recognition, and response to concussion and other serious brain injuries. Kelly, what is a concussion and what are some leading causes?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to participate. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about this important topic. So unfortunately, concussions are an all too common injury. They're one of the most common types of brain injuries among children and adults. Concussions are caused by a bump, blow, or jolt to the head, or a hit to the body that causes the head and brain to move rapidly back and forth. And this is because the brain sits in fluid, and so when it's moved or jostled, the brain can bounce and twist in the skull, and this results in chemical changes in the brain, and sometimes stretching and damaging of brain cells or neurons. And these changes can lead to symptoms that may affect how a person thinks, learns, feels, acts, and even sleeps. Concussions are sometimes called mild traumatic brain injuries or MTBIs by healthcare providers and researchers and others. But I wanted to point out that the term mild is a clinical classification, and it's used because concussions are usually not life-threatening, but people should know that the effects of a concussion are not always mild. Instead, they can be very serious, and people can have symptoms for months or years or longer. I also think it's important to talk about the leading causes of concussion. So most of us think about concussions and think about sports and sports injuries, especially among high profile or professional athletes. But concussions commonly occur outside of sports. In fact, falls are the leading cause of concussions. And this is especially true among very young children, so 4 years of age and younger, as well as older adults. Other common causes of concussion include motor vehicle crashes or getting a hit or blow to the head while riding a bike or doing other recreational activities such as riding an ATV. Survivors of intimate partner violence or domestic violence are also at increased risk for concussions and other serious brain injuries because they're exposed, unfortunately, to potential for repeated head impacts over time.
So we know the concussion experience can be different for everyone, but what are some common symptoms following a concussion?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, concussion symptoms are what a person is feeling after the injury, and it's different for each person, and the symptoms can be quite diverse because our brain does so many things. In general, the symptoms are most severe right after the injury, usually within the first 24 to 48 hours. But during the recovery process, it's pretty normal for symptoms to evolve or change. So sometimes getting better, sometimes getting worse through the process. So, for example, right after the injury, a person may have headaches or feel sick to their stomach. Some people are sensitive to light or noise. But then a few days later, as a person starts to do some of their regular activities, returning to school or work, they may notice different symptoms, like they're more tired than usual, have trouble concentrating. So new things can reappear, or you may feel more sad or anxious than usual. Maybe, and that can be because you're not feeling well as you're getting back to your activities. It's really important to remember that symptoms are generally part of the healing process. It's your brain adapting and changing to some of those symptoms. But if you notice that symptoms are getting worse and not improving over time, it's really important to share this information with your medical professional.
Kelly, thanks so much for sharing these important concussion facts with us. We'll turn now to the traumatic brain injury survivors on our panel to hear about their personal experience with concussions. First, I'd like to introduce Sarah Goody. Sarah is a multi-concussion survivor who is now a college student and concussion awareness advocate. Sarah, can you please talk about your awareness of concussions before your injury, how your first accident happened, and your diagnosis and recovery?
Hi there, and thanks, Lynn, and everyone for having me. I'm super excited to be here today and to talk about my experience with TBI and concussions. I'm a 20-year-old undergraduate student at the University of California, Berkeley, and I've now had 5 concussions in the past 4 years. And my first concussion happened my junior year of high school when I was 16 years old. I was surfing with my best friend. It was actually, I think, the first time I'd ever met her, and we were out surfing, and someone was kayaking and fell out of the kayak. Ended up being a situation where I got trapped in between the kayak and the surfboard, and immediately kind of the world went dark and the world went blank. And prior to this incident, I had never experienced a concussion or a head injury before, but immediately when I woke up, thankfully, and was able to get to shore, I knew that something was wrong. And this started a ongoing battle with traumatic brain injury and post-concussion syndrome. I was told by doctors to give it a week to try and wait it out and see how my recovery would go. And slowly that week turned into months, turned into almost 6 months struggling with that concussion, and led me to take a lot of time off of school for that junior year of high school. After that, I became super prone to any sort of head injury, to migraines, and it's been a journey that's led me up through today. I mean, concussions and TBI is something that impacts my everyday life, whether it's, waking up in the morning and being scared of hitting my head, or walking to class and being wary of doors. Concussions and TBI have truly changed the course of my life. And recovery has been a really long and hard process, but through a lot of different treatments and trying new things, I've been able to slowly start getting better and getting on my way.
Wow, thank you, Sarah. You've really been through a lot. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Lindsay Simpson. Lindsay is an Emmy Award-winning journalist, a former collegiate soccer player, and a traumatic brain injury survivor and advocate. She's also founder of the Champion Comeback Foundation, a nonprofit organization focused on fighting for athletes who suffer from the devastating effects of traumatic brain injuries. Lindsay, can you please tell us about your experience?
Hi, Lynn. Thanks for having me here, and it's a pleasure to be able to share with you guys as we are all in various capacities on a TBI journey of learning more, learning how to advocate, learning how to survive with one. My experience with traumatic brain injury goes back now at this point more than 20 years. I was a collegiate soccer player at the University of Maryland, and by the time my career ended, I had suffered multiple concussions. Each one took longer to recover from until doctors eventually told me that it was no longer safe for me to play anymore. However, my most significant concussion came years later in 2018 when a 40-pound beam fell on my head while I was at work. As Kelly was talking about earlier, it was diagnosed as a mild concussion. but my reality was anything other than mild. I spent nearly a year in bed. I was unable to care for myself. I struggled with everything, with basic functions like making coffee or dressing myself properly. I wasn't able to drive. I wasn't able to book my own medical appointments. And I had to completely and totally rely on my husband to pick up all the pieces and carry our lives forward. And still to this day, years later, I have significant struggles, double vision, all kinds of eye problems, convergence, memory issues, processing challenges, fatigue. I have neuropathy in my extremities. And then I have a, a stutter that comes out from time to time. And these are things that in my past life I had never struggled with, even over the course of multiple concussions. And so part of the challenge is that a concussion is truly an invisible injury. But not only is it invisible, it's also to many people inconceivable. If people can't see what you're dealing with, if they can't see it in a test result, if they can't see it in an MRI or an X-ray, they have a hard time understanding it. And that goes for caregivers, that goes for family members, that goes for doctors in many cases. You wouldn't believe the number of things that doctors have tried to tell me were wrong with me because it just didn't seem conceivable that a mild TBI could result in years and years of really, really debilitating symptoms. And part of that's because they're looking at a single isolated incident, not the course of my medical history of 20 years of brain injuries. And so for me, it's so important to speak to people on how someone who looks like me or looks like Sarah can be struggling with all of these things behind the scenes that people aren't aware of, that they don't see. And we just need to bring awareness to the entire medical community, to the sports community, the military community, any of these communities that regularly see TBI, concussion, that just because it looks one way on the surface isn't a reality for what's going on behind the scenes.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. And you bring up a very important point about the caregiver experience and your husband's experience of caring for you throughout this process. We really appreciate you both sharing your powerful stories. Your experiences show everyone the importance of being aware of the signs and symptoms of concussion, advocating for yourself, and getting medical care. Kelly, can you provide some perspective as to why it's important to seek medical care after a head injury?
Yes, definitely the biggest reason to get medical care after a concussion is to make sure you aren't at risk for medical complications such as a blood clot or bleeding on the brain. This can lead to severe health outcomes and require emergency intervention. There are danger signs to watch for after a hit or bump to the head, and you can find those on the Concussion Awareness Now website. Examples include losing consciousness and inability to be woken up, and seizures, ongoing or repeated vomiting, and those are just a few examples. Watching for concussion danger signs is especially important among people who are taking blood thinners because this can increase the risk for bleeding. Another big reason to get medical care after concussion is because medical professionals have tests that they can help check on the severity of the injury, and they can provide you with treatments and recovery instructions that are based on your specific needs. So, for example, when you're looking to return to driving, when is it safe to return to drive? For example, if you're having vision problems, you may need to wait longer. Returning to work, school, sports, and other activities. And so they can help customize and help you decide and work with you to help set up supports and make sure you can do those things safely. Lynn, I think your audio is muted.
You are correct. I am so sorry. I was going to ask you, how are concussions diagnosed? And can you talk about how the landscape is changing?
Yes, absolutely. Concussion diagnosis can actually be quite complex. because the symptoms overlap with other types of injuries. In general, a concussion diagnosis entails a physical exam. It may include visiovestibular assessment, if I can say that right, which is basically eye tracking and balance assessment. And also a review of self-reported symptoms. So a medical professional will generally go over a list of common concussion symptoms to help understand what the person is experiencing, but also to help rule out more severe injuries, like we talked about earlier, like bleeding on the brain or what's called a subdural hematoma. It also gives them a better sense of the severity of your initial symptoms, which may help understand the recovery trajectory. But as you can imagine, getting self-reported symptoms can be a bit challenging at times. For example, very young children might not be able to communicate how they're feeling. Survivors of domestic violence, for example, may also be experiencing PTSD and have symptoms that overlap, and it may be hard to clarify which if it's concussion symptoms or that of PTSD. There are growing interest in helping us improve the diagnosis of concussion. Right now, a lot of people look at neuroimaging, but I do want to point out that CT scans are not recommended for routine diagnosis of concussion. Those are used when someone is considered at risk for bleeding or other severe complications. But the evidence on concussion diagnosis is advancing rapidly. There's been a huge growth, for example, just in the research studies in the last decade. Scientists are also working to learn how best to identify those in need of emergency care more quickly, how to better predict outcomes, who will have a shorter recovery, who is at risk for an extended or prolonged recovery. And the hope is that if we can answer these questions more thoroughly and come up with more clear testing, we can help provide support and treatments earlier on.
Thank you, Kelly. It's really great to hear about these advances in diagnosis and treatment. So as we've heard today, it's clear that concussions are serious and they are traumatic brain injuries. Kelly, what are some of the key points you want people to know about concussions?
So first, I think it's really important to spread the word that there are steps we can take to lower the chance for concussion. We want to, for example, make sure people are wearing a helmet when they're riding their bike. We know that bike helmets lower the risk for concussion and other serious brain injuries by more than half, and some studies have that even closer to 80%. And also, I do want to point out that when we talk about bicycling safety, I think most of us think about kids, but the data show that the rate of emergency department visits for bicycling related brain injuries is actually highest among adults, in particular adult males over age 18. So all of us need to be thinking about brain injuries when we're doing sports and recreation activities, including if you're riding an ATV, always make sure to wear your helmet. Second, I wanted to make sure that people know that if a concussion happens, if you or a loved one think that you have a concussion or a possible concussion, get checked out like we discussed before and why that's important. But also that the Brain Injury Association of America has state brain injury associations throughout the country, and we're here to help. You can contact the National Brain Injury Information Center to speak to our experts and get information and support. And there is support for caregivers as well.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder that if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A and we will get to them at the end of the webinar. So before we talk about ways that our audience can increase awareness about concussion, let's hear from Lindsay and Sarah about their work in this area. So Lindsay, you've done a lot of public speaking to share your experience. Why is it important for you to share your story and help others understand more about concussion?
That's a good question. And I think for me, as I've been going through this really long, arduous recovery, including losing my career and my ability to work in a full-time capacity, I needed to find a way to, I need to find a redemptive arc. I needed to find a way to say this wasn't for nothing. And so for me, that was starting the Champion Comeback Foundation. It was beginning to speak on what has been the most challenging and difficult and painful experience of my life, and it's not easy. I'm fortunate that I have a background in television and speaking, and so I've had a lot of training and experience to fall back on, but I'm not the same person that I was. I'm not capable of doing things in the same exact way that I did them before, and that's okay. Um, it's taken a long time for me to be able to say those words, but it is okay. And so I think there's a couple of things. One is, do you want to be an advocate? There's certainly a significant lack of advocates in the TBI space. And part of that is because having a brain injury is antithetical to being an advocate and speaking in public and doing all these things, because the symptoms of brain injury make this kind of stuff so difficult. So for people who want to take this step and who want to get into advocacy, I think the best advice is to start small. It's to find a very friendly environment, a small gathering of parents, of student athletes, of whatever that friendly community would be to you, and start small and begin to hone your craft. Not everybody's built to be a public speaker, and that's okay. But for those who are inclined that way, I think it's really important to push yourself. And so you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to all of a sudden have symptoms come up that have been you thought had been resolved. For me, it's my stutter. I never had a stutter before my last head injury, and then I spent more than a year with a pretty significant stutter. And so when I start to get stressed out, or my brain is not moving fast enough, the stutter comes back. And so that's also okay, because that's my story. If I was perfectly polished and doing all the things that I used to do, I don't know that anyone would believe everything I'd been going through. And so I've had to learn to lean into some of these challenges or deficits. And so for me, it's, writing in really big font and having an entire script printed out in front of me that I can read, because I struggle with recall and I struggle with organizing my thoughts. It's, leaning into the stutter or the dizziness or whatever symptom is popping up, and acknowledging it. It lends authenticity to what I'm saying. And I think it's important that people know that there is life at the end of this. And so for me, it's been telling people that, and I'm finding healing, and I'm finding this catharsis through being able to share my story, and hopefully the hope is to help just one person who's also going through something similar. And for me, then it will have not been for nothing.
Well, that's wonderful to hear that it's helping you personally as much as you're helping other people. So you've shared some great tips for people about speaking. Anything else that you want to add there?
Public speaking is hard. There's lots of ways to be an advocate. If public speaking isn't your thing, there's all kinds of social media. There's just showing up and telling people one-on-one that there is life at the end of this. I found a lot of help through mentorship, mentoring other people who have brain injuries, and I found some of the sweetest, most fulfilling relationships in my life have come through some of these mentorship relationships. But if public speaking is what you want to do, it's also about finding your story, finding your message, honing it. It's just like being an athlete. You've got to get the reps in. You have to practice. You have to hone your message. You have to, give it in front of a mirror and give it in front of turn your phone on, record, and practice it. And so that's why starting small is good. Starting with friendly audiences where there's low stakes and there's low probability of embarrassing yourself in a way that you can't recover from down the road, because I promise you, we've all done that before. But it's speaking from the heart. It's telling about what you're going through and giving people who are listening to you an awareness of what a brain injury looks like. You are pulling back the curtains in a world that so many people can't understand. And thank goodness, because that means they haven't experienced it. But for the people who are living it, for these people suffering from this invisible and inconceivable injury, you're speaking on behalf of them. You're speaking for people who can't speak, who don't have the capacity or the platform to share what they're dealing with.
Oh, great, thank you. I know these suggestions are going to be very helpful to the potential speakers out there, both advocates and survivors. And as you said, we know that some people may not be comfortable in front of large audiences, and that's okay, perfectly okay. We can all impact concussion awareness, even in our personal and extended networks. So, Sarah, turning to you, as a college student, you found a community and the opportunity to speak about concussions. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what drives you to continue to share your personal story?
Sure. So I think something Lindsay also just touched on about concussions being an invisible illness, that is what truly drove me to also find my own community within kind of concussions. I think that having a brain injury can feel so incredibly isolating, and it can be really easy to get trapped in kind of a spiral and feel so alone in a struggle with concussion. So I found that coming to college and beginning to talk about my experiences, beginning to speak up about what I was dealing with and about my journey, that was when I started to really find a community, and I started to feel like maybe suddenly I wasn't alone and that there was hope in my recovery. And, coming to college, I didn't expect that concussions would really be something that would impact a lot of other young people my age. I mean, sure, maybe football players or some of the athletes at my school, I thought, yeah, that might be something. But it truly blew me away how many other young people and especially young women were also struggling with concussions, especially coming to college and getting their first concussions. I remember sitting in one of my first kind of lectures in class, and one of my classmates came in and she had sunglasses on and kind of looked a little bit out of it, and I started talking to her, and she was saying, "Oh, I hit my head the other day. I think I might have a concussion." And this turned out to be a reoccurring theme. Even last night, I was at a club event, and the topic of concussions came up, and it was just almost this cathartic experience of talking with all these other young women who are struggling with concussions, not necessarily even from sports injuries, but from hitting their head on bunk beds in dorm rooms or playing ultimate frisbee with friends. So I think once I began to really start talking about concussions, I started to see it, and I started to see that I wasn't alone in my experiences, and that truly changed how I went about my life and made it so that as I was continuing to go through recovery and eventually I did end up receiving another concussion in college, I didn't feel like I was so alone or like I wasn't capable of continuing to persist through my symptoms.
Well, that's great. And I'm sure you are known at school as a resource for people to talk about concussions. So that's really terrific. So you've also found an outlet through writing. Is that right?
Yes, so, kind of applying that same idea of communicating and speaking up and talking, I've been able to utilize writing about my own experiences as a way to really connect with communities, connect with other young women and with TBI survivors. Something that I was really passionate about kind of before concussions entered my life was climate advocacy and climate work. So I used to do a lot of writing as a young child about my experiences as an environmental activist, and more specifically about the intersections of environmentalism and climate change and my own mental health. So when I started to struggle with concussions, it kind of was this pivot in my life. And I started to see that in the same way I could impact environmental issues, I could also impact the space of TBI. So that's where kind of writing came in, and I utilized those experiences, and I've been able to publish a few different bylines and op-eds and or in publications like the Huffington Post and the San Francisco Chronicle. And the response that's come from that has truly kind of changed the way that I see the concussion space and really helped me connect with so many others and just again really made it clear to me that concussions impact such a wide range of people and oftentimes is not something that people have thought about before it's all of a sudden taking over and changing their day-to-day life.
Wow. So that's really good. You've been able to marry a lot of your interests into what you're doing today. So good for you. So, what we've heard from Lindsay and Sarah shows that helping to increase awareness about concussions can take many forms. Talking about concussion doesn't have to feel overwhelming. If you have an interest, you can share your story in ways that are most comfortable for you, from everyday conversations to large events and everything in between.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in quick to also thank Lindsay and Sarah for sharing their stories. This is really important. And I've been in the field for 20 years and been able to see firsthand the power of personal stories and how they can change the concussion conversation. One example that's very personal is Marilyn Spivak. After her daughter sustained a severe brain injury, she used her experience as a caregiver and sharing her story and really worked to inspire others to action. And her work led to what is now known today as the Brain Injury Association of America. And through her work with BIA and other organizations, there's been huge advancements in research and programs and support services for people living with brain injury nationwide. And looking back when I first started in this topic and thinking about concussion and the conversations to where we are today, it's amazing. And I also had the experience to work with the Lysadet family, who are based in Seattle, Washington, and their work has helped change the lives of millions of people. Thinking about Sarah and Lindsay's story, having the sports and recreation related concussions. So Zachary, their son, had a concussion while playing middle school football, and he was not removed from play right after being injured, even though he was showing signs of a concussion. And he had severe implications, severe brain injury. And to make sure other kids don't experience what Zach did, he and his family helped pass the first concussion in sports law in Washington State. I'm sorry, in the nation. The first law it began in Washington State. And today, every state has a law, and many of them are called the Lysadet laws. And it all started with Zach and his courageous family and sharing their story and getting the word out.
Wow, that's really powerful. I'd love to hear stories like that. Thanks for sharing that. So, whether you're a survivor, a caregiver, or someone who just recognizes how important this topic is, Concussion Awareness Now is here with a number of resources that you can use to start the concussion conversation in your own way, online or offline, from our event planning guide to graphics you can share on social media. We also have posters and brochures that you can download and print. It's all available on our website, concussionawarenessnow.org. Again, concussionawarenessnow.org. And if you signed up to be a Concussion Awareness Now champion, you have access to additional resources and educational materials and opportunities that are offered through our email newsletter. So before we open up for audience questions, Sarah and Lindsay, are there any final thoughts you'd like to share? Go
I
ahead,
can
Sarah.
start. Sure. I I just really like to, to say that concussions, it's been 4 years since my initial accident, my initial concussion, and it is something that truly impacts every day of my life. I go throughout my life really fearing hitting my head. It has impacted the way that I connect with others, that I go about life, whether or not I'm able to do even small things like go play soccer with my friends or go to a trampoline park for a friend's birthday. I think that it can be really easy to see concussions as a singular event, but for many people, it can create this ongoing battle, and I just think I really urge anyone with a concussion to start speaking up, to know that you're not alone, that other people are experiencing this, and especially for parents out there. Um, to be there for your child, especially if they're struggling. My parents were truly fundamental in my recovery process, and even though neither of them had had a concussion before, knowing that they were there and them listening to me and just being supportive and whatever it was, being there as a support system that I don't know how, if I would truly be here without them. So parents, you can really help your kids, and I think that you are an awesome support system. So just again, start speaking up, and don't be afraid to connect with this community.
Thank you. Lindsay, how about you?
I love what Sarah said. It's several things. It's that you aren't alone. Um, there are millions, literally millions of us in this country dealing with something similar, and that's an unfortunate reality. And it's one that that we all hope will change in the future. But the reality is that there are so many people going through this, and the nature of concussion is what makes it so hard to talk about. And so I just want to continue to encourage people. I love that this is the initiative right now of how do we raise awareness? How do we continue to make this something that's talked about openly and that's understood more completely? Because every single time I do one of these events, or I'm in a TBI setting, it doesn't matter if it's with other survivors or people in the medical field, researchers, scientists. It's incredible how little is still known and understood about the brain and about TBI and about concussion. And in my experience of going through this over 20 years, and even in Sarah's experience over the last few years, um, it's everything changes. Everything changes from the guidance at the end of, immediately following your concussion, the recovery protocol. I mean, it's just constantly changing. And so it's really encouraging. It's frustrating, but it's encouraging that there's still hope, that there's still an opportunity for doctors and researchers to learn more about the brain and to figure out how to help us recover faster, help us recover more completely. But all of that doesn't happen unless people in the general public are aware of how debilitating concussions are, how isolating they are, how traumatic they are, and how life-changing they are. And so every single one of these events, no matter how large or how small, there's a ripple effect. And so I want to encourage those of you in the audience that are suffering from a TBI, that there is hope, that there is healing, that the brain is an incredible, incredible organ, and it will continue to heal, and it will continue to change and adapt. And I want to encourage you to keep fighting and to keep focusing on how do you use your story to make one person's life different. And that's where it begins. You don't have to focus on these big, huge initiatives or trying to, speak on a really big platform right up front or get published in a really big national publication right up front, but just focus on changing one person's life, one person who's dealing with something that you're dealing with. And from there, it'll continue to grow.
Definitely. Well, thank you both so much. So we're now ready for questions. Again, if you have a question for the panelists, please use the Q&A feature, and we're going to get to as many as we can while we still have time.
Great, thanks, Lynn. So I did notice there's some folks in the participants in the chat that have their hands raised. If you have a question, please submit it using the Q&A feature. We can't unmute you and just let you ask your question, so you just have to type it into the Q&A. So we've gotten a number of questions so far on a variety of different topics. But the first one that I'm going to pick here is it's maybe not so much a question, but it's probably for Kelly. This person said, it seems like getting a concussion once can lead to getting the same injury again. Kelly, can you speak, what are the risks of repeat concussions?
Yeah, so there are some research studies that show that if you have a history of concussion, you may be more likely to get another one. But I think the more important, I think, right now, too, to look at is if you have a history of concussion, share that with your medical professional, because you may be at increased risk for a longer recovery and then more severe symptoms. So always make sure to share that information with the healthcare provider.
Great. Thanks, Kelly. This question is about some signs and symptoms after having a concussion. So the Miss Smith asked, what are some of the symptoms that the brain is overloaded or overstimulated? She said in post-concussion syndrome patients, I'm one of those survivors.
Yeah, I can take this one as well. So, concussion symptoms are different for each person, and so some examples could be just more tired and fatigued, having trouble concentrating. Some people experience changes in their sleep patterns, so you may have trouble falling asleep or sleeping more than usual. Frustration, sort of anxiety, mental health symptoms. There are treatments available to help. There's people that can help you with sleep hygiene, meaning helping you with sleep patterns, improving some of those things. I think it's always important to think through the types of symptoms you're having and work with your healthcare professional to look at symptom specific recovery tips and treatments. We're learning more and more about how different symptoms can be managed better. So don't, keep hopeful because we are getting better and better at that. And if you want a full list of symptoms, because there's a lot, you can always go to Concussion Awareness now or to the Brain Injury Association of America website to look more into that.
Thanks, Kelly. So the next one comes from Richard, who is a youth sports professional. He says, how do you handle the athlete with parents who don't see the possibility of concussion as a serious issue, or athletes whose doctors don't seem to share the same sense of urgency, much like what it seemed like happened to Sarah, when it comes to the signs, symptoms, and severity of concussion?
Yeah, I don't know if Sarah and Lindsay have personal experiences with this. I would say, yeah, it's tricky, right? Because we have made huge strides in concussion awareness, especially in the area of sports concussion. But I would say, so from looking at it, trying to provide education and why this is important, talking about stories, for example. But if you have someone that has really stubborn opinions about this, I would recommend leaning in on the concussion policies of whether it's your school sports program or your youth sports league. And you can always, I think, at team meetings, or just talking to someone one-on-one, say, what are your sports league's concussion policies? Most, if not all, sports programs should have those in place. As I mentioned earlier with the LISDET laws, every state has a concussion in sports law that requires removal from play if someone has a suspected concussion. So you can always mention that. The laws vary in terms of whether they're focused just on schools or on youth sports leagues as well. However, even if you're in a state where it's a school-focused law, it only covers school-based sports, a lot of youth programs have developed policies and statements that require their coaches and or parents to sign information before the season and comply with their protocols. So I think it's always important to look at that and ask those questions. When you're looking at a sports program for your child, you can ask those questions up front. What are your injury policies, whether it's heat-related illness, whether it's concussion, and see what their culture is on safety, because we want kids to be active and have a great time, but we also want to keep them safe. And I'll just say quickly, on a personal note, I have 3 kids, and one of them is 13, and he recently started reffing for academy soccer. And if anyone's had a kid be a referee, it's a experience, and I tend to go on the sideline to help him out because he is young. And he actually had to, it was a U9 game, so these are 8-year-old kids, and one of the little boys got hit at close range with the soccer ball. And so my 13-year-old said to the coach and said, you need to take him out. And so the coach looked at him like, whatever, ref, and kind of brought him to the sideline. The kid started crying because he got taken out, but he was, obviously visibly injured too. And the coach started yelling at my 13-year-old referee son that, why did you take him out and all these things. And he saw me and he looked and he said, well, because it's the law, sir. And I had to take him out. And then he whispered to me later, and I knew my mom would be upset. So, but even a 13-year-old can look and say there's policies and laws to back this up. So that's one of the reasons why the Lysadet family pushed for that, to help provide that network. So long answer, but I hope that helps.
Great. The next question I think is going to be more for Lindsay and Sarah. So somebody asked, and you may have, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but how do you become a mentor? If you're, somebody who's become a brain injury advocate, how do you take that next step?
There's lots of different organizations out there that have mentorship programs. Concussion Legacy Foundation is a great one. They're out of Boston, and they have a huge mentorship program. There's a lot of other smaller organizations that have them. And then a lot of times for me, it's been through word of mouth. My mom called me up a few weeks ago and said that one of her best friend's husbands was in this horrible golf cart accident and had a really, really severe brain injury, and can I talk to him? And so within a few minutes, we were on a call together, and I was talking with his wife, and and so there's opportunities like that come from just people knowing that I've been through this. I probably get a phone call like that about once a month from friends or family members who know someone that's struggling with brain injury, and so I take every opportunity I can to speak to those people, even if it's just one or two phone calls. That could still be, enough. And some of them have developed into long-term, incredible friendships where we talk daily. And so, I would start by looking for organizations that do it. And you can also get plugged in with your local sports community. There's all kinds of folks. There's all kinds of communities for whatever your affinity group is. If you're a veteran, there's a ton of communities, and there's a ton of organizations that help with TBI in the veteran community. And so I would start with what makes sense in your life, and follow that trail to find the right opportunity, and let the people around you know that you want to talk to people, you want to be a mentor, you want to help, and I'm sure the phone calls will start up eventually.
And I would, Sarah, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
I mean, I would just echo exactly what Lindsay just said. I think once you are able to start, speaking up and vocalizing your experiences, it's very easy to start seeing just how frequent concussions are happening, and just to start getting connected. So once I really started speaking up, and even if it was just with friends and family, I would say very similarly, I started having people reaching out to me. So just being open to listening to people's experiences has also been really helpful. I would say also getting involved in an organization or in kind of an advocacy group that is focused on concussions and TBI can be really helpful to, if you're interested in helping more. For me personally, that was getting involved with a group called the Concussion Alliance, and working with them on distributing resources, especially on my own campus. And that helped me also connect with a lot of more survivors.
Amazing. Thank you, Sarah. Well, and I'll also make a plug that the Brain Injury Association of America, we just yesterday opened up applications for volunteer leaders within the organization. So we'll make sure to include a link to that in the follow-up that we'll send out following the webinar with the recording and all that. So we'll share that as well. This question is for the survivors. So could the survivors give some advice on how we as caregivers can better support our spouses with TBI?
I think that the caregiver's job is the hardest. I can't imagine the pain that my husband went through. We had gotten married 6 weeks before the beam fell on my head, and so and he was standing there next to me when it happened, and I can't imagine the pain that he went through seeing his brand new wife almost die. And so I think the caregivers, they need their own support system. It's part of what my husband and I have been trying to do with our foundation is provide a support network for the caregivers. What are the resources that you need to be an effective caregiver, what are the emotional and mental health resources available to you, because it is a very unique situation, whether you're a parent or a spouse or a very close friend who's having to pick up the pieces. It's a very challenging thing. There are some resources out there. There's different organizations um, that do have maybe not totally comprehensive packages for caregivers, but Brain Injury Association of America has resource pages. Concussion Legacy Foundation has resource pages, and I would say to make sure that as a caregiver you are finding your own support system independent of who you are providing care for, to make sure that you have mental health resources, that you have emotional support. And that comes from a variety of different places, but most often I've seen it comes from the caregiver's own a close network of friends and family.
Yeah, and I mean to touch on also the perspective of, a child and watching my parents almost go through with me with struggling with concussions was, again, similar to I think how Lindsay's husband must have felt. It's a very difficult time and very difficult experience. I can't imagine what they were going through as well. But what was really helpful for me from the patient side of things was just having someone to honestly be there with me, whether it was laying in my bed with me or just sitting at a table with me and listening to some light music. Just having someone there, like physically, even if it wasn't talking, but knowing that I maybe felt alone, but I wasn't physically alone was very helpful to me, and I think could be helpful for other survivors as well. And then, just this might sound silly, but when my parents would acknowledge that, it is hard and it can suck, and weren't necessarily always like, it's going to get better, it's going to get better, because sometimes it didn't feel like it would get better. So to have someone that was there that would just listen to how I felt, and support me and support however I was feeling in that moment was really helpful for my process.
Thanks so much. This is a sort of, I think this is a great segue to this question. So we had somebody who said, I'm an all-star cheer coach. We do competitive cheer and tumbling starting at age 3 and 4. Immediately following a fall where a head or a neck injury could be a factor, we have a protocol for coaches and staff. What I'd like to know is how can I be better and more supportive as a coach following an athlete's injury? And if any panelists can speak on what they would have made a big impact or difference following an injury that you were lucky enough to experience or wish you would have experienced.
I think the first thing is that brain injuries come from a lot of forms, meaning you can have a head injury that doesn't have impact. It can be from whiplash, it can be from, that jarring your body without your head actually having any direct hit. And so the first piece of advice is to just be incredibly vigilant and aware, because head injury can come even if someone doesn't fall and land on their head. One of my brain injuries came from I was a goalkeeper in college, and I was diving for a ball, and my head never hit the ground. My shoulder did, and just the jarring of the impact of the jarring of my body on the ground was enough to knock me out of an entire semester of college. And so it can have really significant effects without having a really significant direct trauma. The other piece is that sometimes the symptoms are delayed in their onset. I learned that firsthand with my last brain injury, where some of the symptoms didn't appear for hours, days, weeks, and that's probably more unusual, but it's possible. And so you have to listen. You have to listen to your athletes. You have to listen to your students and make sure you're understanding what they're telling you, because some of the symptoms are weird and may not seem directly TBI. You may not think they have a TBI because they didn't hit their head. And so just just being very aware of your surroundings and of what's going on with your athletes, I think would make a huge difference. And you may have to advocate to the parents. I went through some of that as a youth coach myself. Sometimes parents don't get it, or they don't believe it, or they think, they just got their bell rung. That seems to be the common euphemism in youth sports. And so you may have to advocate on their behalf. And that kind of touches on what one of the other questions was a few minutes ago, that you have to advocate on their behalf, and you have to lean back on the policies that are set in place by your club or your youth sports organization, because sometimes parents don't understand the severity of it, or they don't want to understand. They don't want it to be true. And so you may have to have some tough conversations.
I would jump in too, just building on what you're saying. From I think sometimes teammates can be really challenging as well. And I've seen, like, for example, my daughter plays competitive volleyball, and a girl got a ball to the head and got out for a concussion. And my daughter kept overhearing lots of conversations from her teammates about, oh, I don't know why, she's been out so long. We all get hit in the head. This is kind of silly. She just doesn't want to play or doesn't want to fly to this tournament. And I think it created a really uncomfortable situation for that girl, because volleyball, if anybody has a child or has participated in indoor volleyball, it's a really loud environment. So if you have a concussion, and you want kids to be able to cheer their teammates on while they're recovering, that's a harder environment to do because there's a lot of stimulus and noise. And so she wasn't attending practices, and they're created this real, I would say, really negative environment. And I remember my daughter was only 12 or 13 at the time, and trying to, and because she was like, why is everybody doing that? And because obviously she knows the work I do, and trying to talk to her about, like, let them know that, she's going to recover on her own, try to be understanding and believe that she's actually injured. And I think there was sort of this misperception, and it can happen with ankle injuries too, but I think even more so with concussion, like, she just doesn't want to play right now. And I think that can be really hard. So as a coach, setting that expectation and positivity and understanding for your players can also go a long way as they return, as most kids can return to sports after their recovery.
Thanks, Kelly. So we only have a few minutes left here. I did want to address, we've had a couple questions about referencing the kits that we've talked about, the awareness kits. So we did send out a message to our CAN champions to let people sign up to receive a toolkit in the mail. So we will send out a follow-up link following this webinar to webinar attendees if you would like one as well. So the first round of those are currently in print production and will be shipping very soon. But we will be, we know that there are some people who probably want them even after National Concussion Awareness Day. So we'll send that link around again following this webinar.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Those are some really great questions. I would like to thank again Sarah, Lindsay, and Kelly so much for joining us today. I think we've all learned a lot. I know I certainly have. And I want to thank the audience for joining us today. We hope you'll take this information that you've learned and use it to start the concussion conversation in your own way on National Concussion Awareness Day on September 19th and throughout the year. So as Steve mentioned, you'll receive a link to a recording of this webinar, and we encourage you to share it with others so they can become champions of concussion awareness too. Again, please follow our social media channels and like and share our posts. And don't forget to visit our website at concussionawarenessnow.org to learn more. Thanks again.